All right. We are back. This is the It's Your Perspective Talk Show. It's Thursday, about 8:15 p.m. Our guest tonight is author Gary James. There he is right there. Welcome back to the studio again. The conversation is going to continue. This is part 4.
Yes.
And welcome again to the studio,
Thank you, my brother. It's a pleasure being here. And we're going to continue the conversation. Actually, I've been getting some interesting feedback, so it was suggested that I talk a little bit about some current events. And so we're going to pick up this evening's conversation with current events, specifically dealing with the killing of Michael Brown and Eric Gardner by white police officers in Missouri and New York, respectively. And that has pretty much animated a broad spectrum of Americans in silent protest against police brutality, racial profiling, extrajudicial executions. And from the grassroots to the halls of Congress, black and white citizens, as well as outraged political minorities, participated in a range of peaceful, nonviolent demonstrations in various parts of the country. Several conversations and issues emerge from these incidents of alleged police brutality, which have continued unabated for decades. Other issues, conversations that attend to the allegation of police brutality in the black community include the proverbial race question, black on black homicides, police accountability, crime in the black community, mass incarcerations, and targeting black males by state and municipal judicial systems, for example. I want to speak a little bit from my perspective about extrajudicial executions and acts of alleged police brutality, as I've observed the phenomenon from my observation and experience. I joined the staff of the National Welfare Rights Organization in 1965. And we toured the aftermath of riots in New York, New Jersey, Detroit, California, among other urban centers. And all of these rebellions began following the killing of a black youth by a white police officer. And in 1972, I was elected chairman of the Southeast Queens Community Corporation, an anti-poverty program, one of 25 we had in New York. And during my tenure, there were 2 extrajudicial executions in Queens of 2 youth, one by the name of Clifford Glover and the other Randy Evans. And despite the massive political protests, etc., the political or the police officials in question were never held accountable for the killings in criminal or civil court proceedings. Since that time, 40 to 50 odd young black males were victims of extrajudicial executions in New York City. And as we speak, police officers remain unaccountable, and they are apparently safeguarded from criminal prosecution by way of the old boy network vis-a-vis local judicial systems. But needless to say, the decisions by the respective grand juries were not a surprise to me in the Brown and Gardner cases, because in fact I expected it. Over the centuries, I'm sure we all have observed the pattern of black men being executed with racial overtones in America by white supremacists in general, and currently in the post-civil rights America. Police departments are principally responsible for extrajudicial executions of black youth. And these killings continue with apparent impunity. So I make this statement unequivocally based upon my experience and considered judgment. The obvious questions include: what are the relative factors that account for this phenomenon? And what are the contributing elements that perpetuate the crisis? But the bottom line question is, how can the crisis be stopped? How can we bring it to a halt? That's the real deal. But the situation is complicated. It's more to it than meets the eye, because we have the 24-hour news media cycle, which is relentless with sound bites, hyperbole, and the political spin of sensationalism that boosts ratings, while perhaps unwittingly they perpetuate the conventional race-based narrative. But interwoven in the narrative are sublime, sophisticated ideas and concepts that undermine a substantive exploration of the roots and causes. The media, we need to understand, has a dynamic impact on the black crisis, and the impact of the media should not be underestimated. The real-time nature of media and the press in general, we need to understand, is adversarial. And that's the role they play in general. And that is their role as the so-called fourth estate. But my observation is that there are many moving parts to the national problem of police abuse, racial profiling, and extrajudicial executions. The moving parts include, of course, racial profiling, culture of policing the black community, racism, and the close relationship between police departments and local prosecutors, in addition to the dysfunctional and criminal injustice system. As a consequence of these multiple factors, the phenomenon of extrajudicial executions of black youth by police officers is a national epidemic. The groundswell of nonviolent and creative demonstrations across various demographics, ethnic lines, political spectrums, and economic classes are impressive and important, but an effective strategy resides beyond the civil rights and civil disobedient tactics and paradigm. A close examination of the relative factors that contribute to this crisis in the black community is necessary in order to formulate a cogent, comprehensive, and sophisticated strategy that identifies the factors and minimizes the dilemma. But don't misunderstand me. I salute the many peace protesters that are exercising their constitutional right, and I encourage them to continue, but to broaden their efforts to resolve this pernicious situation. But before I examine the relevant factors contributing to the crisis, I want to mention a popular counterpoint that often accompanies the disproportionate amount of black youth killed by white police officers. And that counterpoint is as follows. You often hear, black on black crime is the real issue. And police killings are not based upon race, but rather because the predominance of crime are committed by black folk. My position on this counterpoint is that police killings and black on black crime are two completely different and separate issues and conversations. Although race is not always a factor in police abuse against black males, the prevailing police culture is also a major factor in these instances. Both police culture and racial profiling are root causes of the problem. Moreover, the traditional relationship between police departments and local prosecutors and the grand jury system compromises the prospects of a fair and independent investigation of the objective facts. Therefore, in cases involving allegations of police abuse and extrajudicial killings, there must be an adjudication by an independent prosecutor. Many within the peaceful protesting context call for a special prosecutor, and I support that. I just don't believe protests get to that point. We have to get to the root of the problem. Excuse me. And the root of the problem stems from how Africans and African Americans are defined in general and perceived in particular. The general definition of Africans, blacks, is based on a myth that the black race is subhuman or otherwise inferior to the white race. This intellectual idea of multiple races was codified by way of academic research and the wholesale promotion that human beings are comprised of multiple races with a hierarchy. And of course, the black race was positioned as the lowest, while the white race was superior in the hierarchy. So hence, the Negro race was born as the lowest caste among other races under the domination of the superior white race. We're talking about roots. The science, literature, scholarship, and popular information reinforce this concept in terms of the true nature and status of human beings. And these core beliefs currently constitutes the conventional imagination and narrative that we operate, that is generally accepted. But as a practical matter, the idea of multiple races with a hierarchy dominated by the white race is in fact a contrived social construct designed to achieve particular economic, political, and social objectives. That's what's up. Current science confirms that all human beings inhabiting the planet as we speak have a common origin. And this common origin is well documented. There is only one race. Nevertheless, the idea of multiple races has crystallized in the human consciousness and imagination. And that is how we generally perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. While current science utterly debunks and discredits the idea of multiple races among human beings, the popular intellectual historical narrative remains in place vis-a-vis the Greco-Roman dominance of history and the superiority relative to the manifest destiny of Western culture. There are obvious contradictions between current scientific evidence and the popular Greco-Roman narrative. And those contradictions represent a very interesting study. But the study sheds no light on this crisis of extrajudicial executions of black youth and how it could be brought to an end. But the fundamental question remains in terms of race. Is it real or is it make-believe? It's really no question. But the conversation completely obscures the real deal on what it really is. So while race is a phantom, as a matter of fact, it has become a real-time phenomenon in the human mind and consciousness as a result of the imposition and promotion of the multiple race social construct. Similar to the fact that we are what we eat, also we are what we think. So we better be mindful. We need to be mindful of what we put in our ori, what we choose to engage in terms of ideas and concepts. And those that float in the popular conversation and conventional wisdom are not the oracle. And going forward, we don't need to base our future on outdated information. This is the information age. Information is available.
Gary, I'd just like to interject something here too. As you touch on this point, just moving back to Luke chapter 16, verse 13, when he said, "What is popular unto man is abomination unto the Most High." You know, so it's like one man is running with his follies and they ain't seeking what Almighty said that we're supposed to do and live and operate from. But just go ahead, because that's where part of our mindset just sent my area.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, because what you said struck a chord in me, and during a future show, I think we need to deal with the spiritual dimension, because there's a spiritual dimension, not proselytizing any particular religion, but there's a spiritual dimension that comes to mind when you raise the particular scriptural reference. But we will look into that going forward and explore it. But while race is a phantom, as a matter of fact, it has become a real-time phenomenon in the human mind and consciousness. And as a result, the imposition and promotion, as a result of the imposition and promotion of the multiple race construct. But as I pointed out, we are what we eat and we are what we think. And America's social, economic, and political institutions are structured in the framework of a race-based paradigm. America's institutions are organized around the race-based paradigm. But race-based discrimination is not the only dynamic that animates police departments toward extrajudicial execution of black youth. Race is a major dynamic of how black communities are policed, but the equally severe dynamic at work in police departments is the prevailing police culture. How police do business among themselves. The tendency to cover up and enforce the old boy network. And I won't take it further, but the point is, police culture is a major problem. And the example of that is perhaps a perfect example of that is how the police culture in the Virgin Islands operates. The police culture in the Virgin Islands, for example, operates in such a way that's detrimental to youth. But the Virgin Islands Police Department is 90% plus black. And the population that it polices is upwards of 85% black. Yet there is a pattern of police abuse and extrajudicial executions. In fact, the VI Police Department, as I understand it, is currently under a consent decree by way of the federal government because of the culture of the department in terms of how it operates. Obviously, racial profiling is not a factor in the way the VI community is policed. Consequently, it's easy to appreciate that the prevailing police culture is the overriding factor relative to police brutality in the Virgin Islands. Therefore, we can conclude with confidence that race on one hand and culture on the other hand are the primary factors at work that animates the proliferation of police abuse. Both race and culture play a dynamic role, more or less, in instances of police abuse. But in instances of alleged police abuse in predominantly black communities, wherein the police department is predominantly white, race becomes the dominant factor in police abuse instances. Nevertheless, race remains a dominant factor that impacts all levels of American society in the 21st century. But we'll explore that in greater detail. We'll explore the race dynamic further in conversation. But I'd just like to make one point as it applies to the issue of police brutality in general. You see, the race question always comes up in the wake of instances of police brutality and extrajudicial executions. The question is always posed by media and often couched in the context of the need for a meaningful conversation on race. In fact, the president had a meaningful conversation on race around the, I think it was the Professor Skip Gates incident of alleged police brutality. I think they had beers or something. But the conversation only reinforces the idea of race-based distinctions. And the conversation is always reduced to arguments around the morality, and wisdom of racial tolerance as the takeaway from these conversations. We should all be tolerant of other races. But the public conversation on race never engages the subject from the scientific perspective, which debunks and discredits the concept of multiple races and asserts that there is but one human race. So how are we talking about races in this much needed conversation? The fact that the idea of multiple races is never discredited puts the integrity of the public conversation on race in question. And I'm questioning it if nobody else has or does. But we won't explore the question further at this time. We'll pick it up though in the future. However, let me just make this observation. The proverbial race conversation never challenges or explores the idea of race in the context of current science. The conversation, such as it is, in a sublime way, reinforces the multiple race idea and glibly makes the point that there are no differences between races. That's what it is. No differences between races. But they keep the matter confused. I don't know if it's deliberate or inadvertent. But it needs to be understood that race is a phenomenon, or as a phenomenon, has become crystallized in the psychology and consciousness of the human mind. And that is the root of the ongoing dilemma. Interestingly enough, even the conversation on extraterrestrial beings are referenced as alien races. So we got aliens, extraterrestrial races, and we got races of human beings here down on Earth. I'm telling you, boy. There are no races of human beings, okay? And there are no races of extraterrestrial beings. I'll go out on a limb with that one. But we'll continue to engage the race question, the race conversation, as it relates to other issues of importance, as the religious and spiritual dynamic. We'll deal with that in the future. But we will continue to make the point that race is a phantom. Now, relative to the issue at hand in terms of police brutality and extrajudicial killings, protests have proliferated around the country calling for the end of racial profiling, police brutality, reforms in the grand jury system, and special prosecutors in alleged police brutality cases. Protests and other civil rights strategies and tactics, offer outlets for abounding community discontent and dissatisfaction with the status quo. But mass demonstrations have little, if any, impact on minimizing or mitigating the problem. Corrective action on the part of the people in the community is required. We have to stop letting the tail wag the dog. Corrective action on the part of the community requires a cogent and lucid political and economic strategy that is organized and implemented on a 24/7, 365 basis. Can't make any changes of any significance in policy and political policy or how things are done, nor can you hold political officials accountable if you don't begin to organize within your specific community and address your insufficiencies as being too laid back. We have to get on the ball, and it requires 24/7, 365 study and work. You can't hold political officials accountable once every 2 years. The required corrective action cannot be approached, organized, and applied within the conventional civil rights political motif. Moreover, protests and demonstrations may have greater liabilities as compared to the possible benefits that there may be. In fact, I believe at best, protests and demonstrations as a political tactic generate 50% good and 50% bad outcomes at best. You see, civil rights today in the 21st century does not have the impact it had in the 19th and 20th century, and specifically during the civil rights era, because the powers that be learned from the civil rights era. And so, in fact, they've mitigated pretty much all of the advances and victories gained during the civil rights era because of how they play electoral politics and how we don't play electoral politics. They play it as though it's a game of chess, and we play it as though it's a game of checkers. Chess has long-range objectives and moves, and you have to anticipate what your opponent is doing, and you have to understand the board. But checkers is not like that. You just get in there and jump over your opponent, get a king and stuff. Yes, and you're good to go. But the requirements for us to move from point A to point B in the 21st century requires that we approach the things we do, like politics and economics and other things, as though we are going to school about learning something and learning to apply that which we have uncovered, discovered, learned. And so it is a different mode that we have to begin to get accustomed to. We have to come out of our comfort zone and the things we usually do on the weekend and on vacation and every time we get a chance, you know, and how much we like to be entertained and take advantage of entitlements. So we have to do some other stuff, and this current situation with police brutality points out that there are things that have been going on for centuries, and we now have the power, the potential that we didn't have before. But we have to begin to understand that our thinking is important. We are what we think, and we have to begin to think about some other ideas. We have to challenge the conventional wisdom. We have to push the envelope. And we have to come out of our comfort zone. Now, the issue with the police brutality scenarios is that we have to come up with solutions to the problem. And demonstrations, as I pointed out, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. And the negative half a dozen can pretty much eclipse the good half a dozen that comes from it. Now, during my organizing days, there were hazards that we were well aware of that would occur as an organic process in organizing demonstrations and protests. You always have infiltrators. That's a part of the deal. But you have to understand the nature of the infiltrators and who they are. The infiltrators nowadays are similar to the infiltrators and agent provocateurs that we had back in the day. But back in the day, they were a little bit more lethal on both sides of the aisle, from the community and from the powers that be. But for example, when I was involved in protests and demonstrations, we had to be mindful that there are people in the political activist realm that believe in perpetual revolution. There is never peace. There's never satisfaction. There's always some movement forward. They believe in perpetual revolution. Now, back in my day, when we were doing demonstrations, we had to be careful of names like the Baader Meinhof gang, tough dudes, the Weathermen, the Weather Underground, and a whole range of militant activists, not the least of which was the Black Panther Party or the Symbionese Liberation Army. You don't have those in place anymore, although you do have the quote new Black Panther Party. But essentially, you don't have those real lethal, hardball revolutionaries that really believed in violence, in blood revolution, no bloodless, peaceful revolution. In fact, that was part of the dynamic that was the basis of the juxtaposition between the civil rights movement and the civil rights leadership paradigm as compared to the Black Power leadership paradigm. Many don't know that there was an internal struggle that ultimately benefited the civil rights leadership paradigm. They came out victorious because while the powers that be didn't appreciate them at first, when they infiltrated the Democratic Party and enabled the liberal wing of the Democratic Party to wrest control of the party from the conservative wing, they didn't like black folk then, and the development of the black conscious movement as it was occurring. But they had to choose between civil rights leadership paradigm and the Black Power leadership paradigm. And that was not too hard a sell for them to come to the conclusion, because the Black Power cats believed in armed struggle. And they didn't appreciate the orientation of how you earn and leverage and generate money on your own for your own financial independence. They weren't about that. They were about strong arming money, because at that point they realized that politics couldn't go anywhere without bread. If you can't feed your troops, or if you can't put a strategy in place that's going to take months or years, and you can't finance the undertakings during that process, you're in bad shape. You can't pull it off. And that has been the problem with the advancement of black folk from emancipation to the modern civil rights movement to now we're in the second decade of the 21st century. So we have to begin to look at some other stuff. And community organizing is one of them. Now, in New York, in terms of police brutality, there were various strategies and ideas how to minimize it. One of the problems was the fact that the police commissioner in New York and most other states, cities in the states, most police commissioners serve at the pleasure of the mayor. And so the police commissioner is accountable to the mayor and not accountable to people who he serves. Hence, there is no volition on the part of the police commissioner to change the culture of policing the black community. Because he don't see black folk other than the fact of policing the community. And he's not accountable to black folk because he serves at the pleasure of the mayor. So one of the strategies that was discussed in great detail was the need to have the commissioner of police popularly elected. So if the police commissioner was elected by the people who he policed, then there would be more of an inclination or volition on the part of the commissioner to realize that he has a level of responsibility and accountability to those citizens that he's policing. So, because of how the New York City Charter is set up, there would have to be an amendment to the city charter to achieve that. And also, there was issues with bringing popular referendum for a vote in New York City politics. So there was a few maneuvers that had to be managed in order to change or impact positively the accountability question of the police commissioner to the people. So there were some studies that were undertaken, but to make a long story short, the strategy is required and financing is required to finance that organizing effort to bring that about. You have to change the city charter or otherwise do some things. You have to bring that about. And you can't do no organizing on the political level unless you educate people to vote and register people to vote. But we as a community of citizens in the Virgin Islands and in the States are not strategically organized sufficiently enough in the realm of electoral politics to do any organizing that's meaningful beyond building the Democratic Party. That's what we do in the States, and that's what we do here in the Virgin Islands. And if all black people in the VI and in the States were in the Democratic Party, we would still be powerless because we would not be engaging the process. We would be all in one basket. And you think we're fighting now? It would be a serious rumble in the jungle. see. But you know, we are accustomed to being pawns and tools of others because we buy into others' arguments and we take it on emotionally and rumble with each other about that. You know, because if you go back to Du Bois and Booker T was the Uncle Tom because he was about economics. He was about training. He wasn't about politics. See, so we've been preoccupied with politics for a long time, but to the exclusion of the requisite economics. So our politics was always subject to our paternal fathers who would finance our politics. And they would do so as long as it served them. But when it served the interest of moving black folk from point A to point B to establish a level of power in order to finance political endeavor and engagement, it becomes an evil. It's communist. It's capitalism. Got to watch out for capitalism. Now the fact is, we got to watch out for human nature. Capitalism and all those other isms don't do anything. It's people who infiltrate these organizations with their particular intent. Much of it is nefarious because of the state of human nature, such as it is. So we're bound to corrupt anything that we engage in until we start thinking about other ideas and concepts and not buy into the typical conventional sound bites and various entertainment venues that otherwise occupy our every thought and imagination. So it is quite interesting, the dilemma we have in front of us, but we can deal with it, but we have to deal with it. But in addition to the police commissioner scenario of making the commissioner accountable to the voters, the civilian complaint review boards, they were well, they had potential and various methods of structuring a civilian complaint review board were tried, but it never worked out too well because these boards never had teeth, and so they would always be subservient to the powers that be. And part of the problem was because we didn't register to vote as we should. Therefore, when we are called to participate in various proceedings in court or voting in primaries to determine the nature of who is going to be running in the general election, we don't do that. So ultimately we are not available, accessible to participate on the local civilian boards to impact positively the situation. But what is hopeful, though, and much of the marches call for it, and protest demonstrations call for the need for a special prosecutor. That's a real deal, you know, in the States and in the VI, because there's an incestuous relationship between the police department and the grand jury system, you know, and the courts, you know, and I mean, apart from just the general corruption of politics, you have that relationship wherein the courts rely on the police department to handle their court business, and the police department relies on the court to handle their police business. So when it comes to investigating the behavior of police departments, you have to have an independent review of those circumstances. And that won't happen. It won't happen by the protestations and demonstrations. It would only happen when the tail or the tail stops wagging the dog, meaning that we have to begin to register to vote and change how political business is done. But when we register to vote, we have to be serious. When we approach it, we have to be serious. So if only 50% of the eligible voters are registered to vote, the grassroots are not doing their job, because there needs to be a greater plurality than 50% of the people who are eligible to vote being registered. So, I mean, I don't know what the situation is here, but I know in the States it's dirt poor. So that has to go down. But there's so many other factors that have to go down. But that is how you could begin to organize yourself in such a way that you could make the notion of a special prosecutor real. Otherwise, there won't be any, because it's not going to happen from the top down. It just don't work that way. So I'm looking forward to doing my part and being further inspired to talk about these things. And thanks these brothers for this forum, which further inspires me to work on some projects that we think will be useful to be a part of the broader conversation and approach to how we move forward in the 21st century to improve our circumstance. So I'm looking forward to that, and I continue to be inspired along those lines. And just a note, we talked about current events today vis-a-vis police brutality, But we will be discussing other areas of current events because I'm getting interesting feedback from listeners to the show.
Yes, sir.
So I appreciate that. And in fact, when we meet again in 2015,
Yes, sir.
the show will also be about some a question specifically that a listener asked me to discuss a little further. We touched on it last time, dealing with economics, financing. And his essential question was, what are the factors that keep us as black folk resistant to a business experience? Why are we so pro employment and wage earning oriented, as opposed to being interested in entrepreneurship and a business experience? And so I promised that I would discuss that further because I do think it is something that is worthy of an ongoing conversation about.
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to look into that. I know time is winding down. What does it look like?
Yeah, just a few more minutes.
Yeah. Well, do you brothers have any questions or any comments or anything you want to just perhaps?
Well, I just wanted to say that as far as like the whole thing of the police brutality that happens here, I think that in some respects we're somewhat lucky because we all know at times, you know, Virgin Islands residents, when they get pulled over, have a tendency to sort of get out of hand. You know, I mean, we've all heard about that. And so, this kind of getting out of hand in the States usually ends up with someone being shot.
Absolutely.
Here it's more of a, an argument kind of thing. But, in the States, you will get shot for jumping out your car and questioning why I got pulled over. So, it's always sort of a, I guess in a sense I don't want to say we're lucky that doesn't happen here, but we just can't we can't take advantage, but we don't want to be taken advantage of either. That's
very important, and I think the point you raise speaks to the fact that we're all family.
One big happy family.
Fortunately, the population is small enough, and has been there's been a level of insulation.
Okay.
And so people have been here for a while, and we know each other, and we're related. And I'm certain that is a factor. And it is something that should not be looked at lightly, and it deserves appreciation.
Yes.
Because it could really be a rough camp.
Yes, it could be a tragedy right there and then. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So our guest tonight is author Gary James, Black Politics 2.0. His conversation continues tonight as he just finishes here. Part 4. He'll be back on January 8th next year, 2015. Part 5, 8
there
p.m.
We go.
We're gonna. I guess it's not every other week this time, but it's gonna be the 3 weeks because of the holiday and all that. And then once we hit that first one in January, then we'll get back to the every other week, moving forward another month or so, I guess, until he kind of gets everything put together. But we want to thank you for coming out to our studio, Gary. It's always a pleasure, man, to have you here.
Thank you, brother. It's my pleasure. You guys always inspire me. I look forward to coming here, and I like to say that I just love what you brothers are doing, and there's nothing you can do about it.
All right, Gary.
All
Well
right,
said.
Gary.
Well said.
Well
Thank you
said.
much again, and enjoy the holidays and
Yeah.
and,
Yep.
and
I
all
will.
that good stuff that's going
Yeah, I'll
on.
be spending holidays with family. You know,
Right. Yeah. 'cause,
my family is prolific out here
yes.
that I've discovered.
All right.
So I'm enjoying that.
Right.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
And so Happy New Year.
Yes. Happy New Year to you too.
And we'll see you after the New Year.
Yes, sir.
The New
And
Year
look
comes
forward to doing it again, bro.
For sure. For
Okay.
sure, man.
That's it right there, man. Soup. Any final words, man?
Rastafari lives. One perfect love.
Yeah, man. We like to say one perfect love is our prayers and His blessings. When you put it all together, you get one perfect love. Rastafari stands alone, man. We'll be back. Actually, we have a show tomorrow night, Friday. We don't usually do a show on Friday, but we got a special guest coming in on Friday to entertain us with some stuff. I don't want to give any secrets out yet, but the guest will be here tomorrow, and we'll take it from there. On that note, man, Soup, we're out. We'll see you guys tomorrow. That's how it goes down. Peace.